Live from Los Angeles. Welcome back to Good Morning LaLa. It's hashtag Friday Feels. And we have got the host of Radically Loved in the house. You might have seen her on Jesse Golden's show, full of golden rules. But now we get her on Good Morning LaLa. And thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure.
Thank you so much.
We're talking love addiction. Have you ever been addicted to love?
I don't actually, I'm not sure. I've been in a relationship for 15 years, so I'm very familiar with all of the things, especially, sort of everything that you go through with growing and learning from each other. And as a yoga teacher and as a coach, I get to work with a lot of people that are in relationships and go through a lot of the things that Dr. Erin was talking about. So it's quite interesting to just kind of see the dynamic of how relationships are evolving now with social media and dating apps and all of these. It's so intense, yeah. And just being in a relationship long term. So I think I've learned quite a bit.
Well, I think you've become quite an expert on the subject, but it's really interesting too in talking about love addiction and being radically loved, right?
Yeah.
How would you tell people to radically love on themselves?
Well, I think a lot of it just starts with, checking in and being able to tune into where you are and what you're wanting to create for your life. It's like everything that you guys have been talking about, like really having the awareness to look within and ask yourself, what makes you happy, what you're looking for, how can you create a life of fulfillment within yourself as opposed to wanting somebody else to fill that void for you.
I mean, that's the ultimate yoga, right? And I think that in our country, a lot of people don't even know that yoga is a spiritual thing. They think it's a physical workout, and that's fine. But yoga is a full merging of the higher self and lower self, which is really the ultimate love. And so how do you bring those distinctions in?
Yeah,
during
I
your
think
classes?
it's so important. And I feel like, look, I'm of the mindset that everything is yoga. I'm not the person that's like, oh, that's not yoga. I understand that for a lot of people, goat yoga might be a gateway to like the more spiritual elements of the practice. But yeah, yoga means union, right? It means to join, and it's all part of the collective, the tapestry of everyone's individuality and bringing it all together. And so I really feel like it's one of the most important things for me, just as a teacher and as a yogi, to bring into my classes and to my podcast and trainings and everything that I do, because I feel like that's the ultimate practice, right? It's to be able to have that spiritual connection with something bigger than yourself.
Just love that. I totally agree that the world is the mat. The world is your mat.
Yeah.
How would you define love? Because I think that in of itself, I have a good psychologist friend, Dr. Rosie Acosta. She's been on the show before, and she said, something really profound. She said, I've discovered that a lot of the challenges that people have in relationships, whether they're platonic or romantic or professional, is that they define love differently. So when I say, I love you, what do I mean? When you say you love me, what do you mean? And people actually sometimes have radically different definitions of love. So for you, what is love? And I know it's a big question.
I mean, I'm of the mindset that we're all loved, right? So that's what radically loved comes from. It's from this idea that we are all radically loved and held by a higher power source, baby Buddha, whatever higher power of your understanding, where the universe works for us and not against us. And so for me, love means to be of service. It means to be in the service of somebody else, to actually be fully present and to care for somebody just as I would care for myself. A lot of the times we confuse loving somebody with giving everything and making sure that they're happy, that selfless act. And I think that being of service doesn't necessarily mean you have to just care about other people and not care about yourself. I think being of service means being of service to something bigger than yourself.
I love that. Ramana Maharshi once said that the highest form of love or service was self-realization or self-abidance.
Yeah.
Right? It's a perfect. I just love it.
So tell us, so you've been with your partner or married for 15 years?
It's complicated. She's probably watching this right now. Yeah. We've been together for 15 years. We just recently got engaged earlier this year.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
So what do you do? Because I mean, it's not like you get to some place, I imagine, in a relationship where it's just all good all the time. Like everyone has things that come up. So how do you deal with it? How do you personally deal with that?
So the way that I check in is like, I know that I am firm in my resolve, but there's like a 1 or 5% chance that I could be wrong. So I always leave a little bit of space for that, and then most of the time, once I'm able to reflect, I can see if I was being a little bit reactive or if I was the one that was, causing an issue. I'm so lucky. I mean, he is so even keeled,
So
and
right.
I always say he's more of a yogi than I'll ever be, because he's just very grounded, and we're very lucky.
I came to the epiphany that you can be in an argument and everyone can be right.
Oh, totally.
Like there's no right or, it's just literally like there's really just a communication gap majority of the time. So how do you do that? In the heated moment, it's sometimes really hard.
Yeah.
So what's the yoga practice for you in your relationship? How do you come back together? How do you communicate with it, not escalating again?
Yeah, well, I feel especially after being together for so long. We started dating when I was 20, so, I'm 35 now. And there's a lot of changes that happen when you're in your 20s and, all of those things. And I feel like for us, we've always been really big on communicating and talking things out. And there have been times where we've had to actually ask for a third party's opinion because we can't sometimes, come to an agreement, or, we change the things that we want in a relationship and it evolves. And I think knowing that just as individuals, we evolve with the time, that our relationship does the same. But I think ultimately, when two people have the same goal to be in a relationship and to have it be successful, regardless of what you're not getting or what's different or what you want your other person to change, because we're always right. I think that if two people have the same goal to create a life together and to come back to an even space or equanimity, then everything can be worked out.
Love that.
Yeah.
That gives a lot of people hope.
Well, I'm a believer. I'm like team love. So, and I've
We're all team love.
Yeah,
here.
right. And I've
Yeah.
worked with people that are, in the brink of almost getting a divorce. And look, I can relate to those feelings. I'm sure we all can relate to. There's a moment in a relationship where you can make a choice, right? There's just that moment where you can say, I can either choose to work this out or I can choose to not work it out.
Yeah. And that's why I think, and I'm not going to ever stop saying it, even if it annoys people, is that like there's such a difference between focusing on the form that love takes and focusing on love. The form that love takes is the relationship. And we get sometimes so attached to it and it going a certain way. Whereas if we were to commit to love itself and just being love itself, despite how the relationship turns out, what form it takes, whether it's platonic, whether it's romantic, I think that in of itself is a greater solution than to trying to like force this relationship to be something that it may not be meant to be.
Yeah, release the expectations
Yeah.
of that and forgive yourself, forgive the other person for not meeting those expectations.
Well, and I think that too, that's where the yoga comes in, right? Because yoga is all about diminishing the ego and getting to a place where you're not so attached, right? So, the Buddhists believe that we suffer because we become attached, right? So we're attached to a person, a result, a certain way of being. And I feel like when you have that concrete way of being, it makes it really difficult to go around it or to learn different ways to manage or to come to a solution.
It's one of the reasons I love A Course in Miracles so much, because right, it's such
Yeah.
a right. They've done such a great job of sort of defining that ego as essentially fear, and that at the end of the day, there's only love, and then there's a call to love. The fear itself is a call to love, and that's the dropping of the ego. I love the way you described it, though, in terms of attachment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how can people work with you? What does it look like for them to work with you?
Well, I work, as a life coach or a spiritual counselor or a yoga teacher. Usually they'll come to me with something that they're wanting to create, or if they're in a relationship, maybe they're wanting a little bit of insight, and that's all that I provide. I'm a big fan of like, get a coach, a teacher, a doc, your therapist, like have a team of people to come help you, in this. But I use my podcast as a platform to, talk to all of these different subjects and, guests that I have on. We try to bring all these elements together. And so, I work with people individually or, on retreats, which you guys were talking about earlier, with couples, they can go together as, you know, a retreat to reconnect. So yeah, there's different ways.
Love you. Love your work.
Yeah, thank you for all your time
Thank you.
and service,
Thank you so much.
helping us feel radically loved. Stay tuned. We'll be back with more on Good Morning La La Land.